Customers of restaurants that's appeared on Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. What was the food actually like before and after the show helped the restaurant? I live in Denver, where a pizzeria called Pantaleone's that was on the show is located. I have eaten there off and on, for almost 25 years, believe it or not. The pizza was always good, very expensive and often unavailable, because of the odd hours and habits of the owner. The owner is a cantankerous guy that seems not to care much about what his customers think of his place. After the show, you can see that the menu is more standardized, but honestly, I see no change in the place. I'm honestly curious, how he keeps the place open sometimes. If he just hired a delivery person, and gave two shits about customer service, this place would probably dominate the neighborhood. I visited here in April, completely by accident. It was late, had no idea it was on the show, and my experience was not very great. The owner was there, and he kept asking if we had seen his episode of the show and how he had been on TV or about his favorite ice cream place an hour away. He didn't stop talking to us for about 20 minutes and kept rambling on about whatever he could, and eventually, it slipped that his wife had left him. I felt really bad for the guy, because it seemed like he was just super lonely and all he had left was this restaurant. We had a pizza that night and it was really subpar. The toppings were sliding off the pizza and the crust reminded me more of a sopapilla. Definitely not Denver's best pizza. Mama Cherry's Soul Food Shack closed. What a shame. It closed due to a bad investment and the 2008 global financial crisis, not lack of customers. She brought out a successful cookbook, and a new restaurant in Croydon has opened serving her recipes, with permission from Cherry. She tried to go bigger to capitalize on the good feedback from the show, but she went too big too soon and the restaurant lost its charm and focus, which turned viewers off, who were looking for that small exclusive feel. The Mad Cactus was on an episode, and it was so disgusting even longtime customers were turned off. It was open for about 28 years, but it was so dirty on TV, and you know they cleaned like crazy before they appeared on TV, and it was still so bad, no one wanted to ever go back. It is currently a Christmas tree lot, and I don't think many people care anymore. I only miss the margarita nights. If anyone had not seen the Mad Cactus episode of Kitchen Nightmares, I would suggest it. Years ago, during a trip to the UK, I decided to go to the Fenwick Arms, because it was the most commonly rerun episode on BBC America, and British gravy sounds awesome. Unfortunately, by then they'd closed, but Brian and Elaine, the owners, had simply hopped from Lancashire to Yorkshire, and opened a new restaurant called the Ship Inn. I had the roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, gravy, and buttered vegetables, along with a pint of some local beer. It was, bar none, the best meal I had the entire trip. Definitely worth going out of your way for. I actually had my rehearsal dinner at Leon's in Montclair, New Jersey in 2012. Their episode was on TV about a year earlier, but I don't know when he was actually there. We obviously watched the show before we booked. The problems on the show seem to be management related, as well as the classic 2 billion items on the menu he seems to encounter every episode. I cannot speak highly enough about how they handle the rehearsal dinner. The food was great, though to be fair, good Italian food in a setting like that in North Jersey is not hard to come by, but the service, especially the attentiveness of the manager, could not have been better. I can't speak to how it was before other than what I saw on the show, but if that was accurate then Gordon whipped the guy in the establishment into shape. 10/10. Also, my review was from October 2012, their website looks pretty nice now. That can be telling of how they care about their business. I live near Capri and have dined there pre and post Kitchen Nightmares. The restaurant was featured on Season 4, Episode 10. Before the show, it was dingy, dusty, and in dire need of redecoration. It was exactly as it looked on the show. We have restaurant letter grades in Los Angeles, and it was rated B at the time. You have to make a concerted effort to be filthy to earn a C. The food was meh, the Caesar salad was pale and sad. Then came Kitchen Nightmares, and honestly, yes, the place turned around. It's not the best pizza in the neighborhood, but it's nice, and yes, the garlic knots are tasty. They are still going strong. I was on the Park's Edge episode in Atlanta on the before night. Dinner was free because everything got sent back, but our bar tab was $100 for just my wife and me. We're visible in a couple scenes too. That one was an inept management episode rather than a dirty kitchen episode, but it still closed a few months after taping. My dad runs a fairly nice, and popular, local restaurant and got a call about doing Kitchen Nightmares. He didn't want to do it because he watches the show, but the owner really wanted to. So, the producers came to check it out and were like, oh never mind, this isn't the type of place we normally do. Believe they ended up doing Cafe Han instead. I live in Hampton, a neighborhood in Baltimore. Ramsay filmed at Cafe Han, a Baltimore Han-themed restaurant, complete with cat eyeglasses, beehive haircuts, Elvis statues, and anything else you might find from the musical Hairspray. The food has always sucked. After the show aired, it still sucks. There's a giant pink flamingo on the side of the building though, so the tourists think it's quirky and so Baltimore. It's a depressing, tragic display of kitsch, false charm and manufactured quaint. The owner once trademarked, "Thank you, netizen," the word Han, which had been part of the Baltimore dialect for decades. She also had a gift shop nearby, on town, that closed. Good riddance. There's tons of great food in the neighborhood, and all the locals know it. The tourists go to the place with the big flamingo. A restaurant around where I grew up, rural NJ, was featured a few years back. I think it was called Flamingos. It was an outdated tropical themed place, very odd for that locale, with mediocre food. But Ramsay changed it into a sports bar with some higher end dishes. It did fairly well for a while due to the publicity, but it has since been reopened and remodeled by new owners, I think, and the food is pretty good. A family friend's restaurant wasn't on Ramsay's show, but on the other one, with a similar theme, Restaurant Impossible, I think. It was a family-owned Italian place, Anna Maria's in Dunmore. The food was really good when I was younger, but the husband died, and the wife got older and struggled to keep it up to the same standards. Eventually, one of the kids moved back to help out, but he had zero experience and couldn't do much. This is around when the show came in. Show came. Some increase in quality of food. The food was never bad. The biggest changes by far was the decor and stuff, but basically, everything reverted back to how it was. The town is small and filled with old people. Since, no one young would really want to live there, and they didn't really want the place to change. The biggest problem with the place was, and continues to, be that the customer base in the area is simply dying out with no infusion of new people. The show was never going to be able to help much. My ex used to work at Amy's Baking Company, the one with the infamous nuts owner. This was 2010, I think, or maybe 2011. Anyway, I went to pick her up from work but got there a bit early, so decided to grab a coffee. The guy who owned the place made me sit outside in the middle of July in Scottsdale. For those of you who don't know, this means drinking a hot coffee in 120-degree weather. I couldn't really hang enough to eat food, since it was miserable. Turns out he thought I was a spy and trying to learn the kitchen secrets, and that is why I was forced to sit outside. It ended up being a hilarious experience because the episode was spot on for how crazy these people were. A few years back, an inn from my hometown was featured on Hotel Hell. It was owned by a really snooty couple who were notorious for barely paying their employees and collecting tacky art and antiques. Personally, I had a few interactions with these guys when they briefly owned a small cafe in town, about a decade ago, where I once played what had been advertised as an open mic only to arrive to find no MC or PA system. Basically, the dudes wanted free quiet dining music for their, very few, dinner guests. Weak tea, but par for the course. Anyway, Ramsay did an episode, where he not only exposed the fact that their staff were being exploited, and their garbage antiques and tacky collectibles weren't worth jack shit, but also illustrated how their rooms smelled like garbage. Neither of the owners had any business sense, yet felt that they were better than the locals, and, shockingly, the local consensus was that they were total pricks who should be avoided at best. Fast forward a few months, the inn's dining room has been redesigned and is now local friendly. I go once. It's alright. Harpoon bottles at an average price. The local bar was closed at the time, so my friends and I were down to check it out a few times. As soon as our regular watering hole reopened in its far more convenient location, and with drafts, I don't think any of us went back there. Last I heard, the inn had closed down and sold. Can't help but think it's for the best. A restaurant in my town wasn't on Kitchen Nightmares, but it was on Restaurant Impossible. The wagon wheel had been here for decades before Robert Irvine stepped in. The restaurant itself was dark and greasy. The walls, the floor, the tables, everything was greasy to the touch, and the staple on the menu was fried muskrat. I couldn't even look at it. My grandfather once ordered it and it came out on a plate, head and all. Safe to say, the food was bad. After the show ended, the food was still crap. They refused to remove the muskrat from the menu and went back to their previous ways before Irvine tried to help. So, they closed down and the restaurant got bulldozed to the ground. Now, it's a used car sales lot. I've been to Zocalo and Chiarella's, which are both in Philly. I was in grad school at the time and my boyfriend, and I stumbled into Zocalo post Kitchen Nightmares, since it was close to our school, but we deliberately sought out Chiarella's out of curiosity. I think we discovered Kitchen Nightmares from a small sign in the front door of Zocalo about Gordon Ramsay's visit. I had been into Hell's Kitchen a few years before but discovered Kitchen Nightmares thanks to that. Zocalo had awesome margaritas and some good appetizers. The food was pretty good, but for a Mexican restaurant, it lacked a little spice. Chiarella's food was actually really good, great pasta, dessert, and meat. I specifically love the spaghetti and meatballs, even though I usually don't dig that stuff. I felt a little awkward going there, since the family drama was pretty intense in that episode. We tried to get to the Hot Potato, a place that mostly served baked potatoes, but it closed before we could get there. That being said, the food was really good, and we did go back. I was better prepared to drink a shitload of free wine the second time around and was not disappointed. Restaurant Impossible. Pier West in Twin Lakes. I worked there a bit after the show left. The food was great. Regularly ordered some for after my shift. However, my paychecks bounced twice, and the owner would pay me in cash. Then, when I started threatening to take him to court, he removed the mop from the kitchen, and I could not clean. He then fired me for not mopping. There was a Japanese restaurant called Sushiko, where I lived, that received the Ramsay treatment. I was even invited to the recording of that Kitchen Nightmares episode. The place was shut down a few months after that episode, although there was nothing necessarily problematic with it to begin with. I'm pretty sure the main problem was not with the food, but with the owner. He was a very dedicated and hard-working guy, but his wife was constantly fighting with him. My dad was the bartender at the Monticello Hotel, which was on Hotel Hell. The whole place was a local treasure but had gone to shit under a new owner. The show's edit made it look like it turned back into that local treasure, but before the show filming ended, Ramsay told my dad to leave, which he did, and is now the manager at this nice restaurant/bar in the middle of town. The place was closed a couple months later. I was in Nashville on Fat Tuesday and my wife and I were looking for an authentic Cajun meal and hopefully some good Zydeco to go along with it. I did some research and found this place called Chappie's on Church. Initially, it was the background story that got me interested. It was a feel-good story of how the first restaurant in Mississippi was ruined by Hurricane Katrina and they decided to move to Nashville and start all over again. The reviews were mostly good, and they were even better from the old Chappie's in Mississippi, so we went. They did have live music which was nice, it was overpriced, and the food wasn't terrible, just not memorable either. A year later and I see the episode on TV, and I was disgusted to see how dirty this place really was. In my opinion, Chappie just didn't have the motivation to change, and he blamed everything on Gordon and Kitchen Nightmares. I never went back but the place soon closed after the show aired. Not Kitchen Nightmares, but Restaurant Impossible, which is the same idea on Food Network. Bryant's Seafood World in Hueytown, Alabama used to be a fun family restaurant, with all the fried seafood you could want in a blue-collar town. The new owner took it over and tried to fancy the menu up. Prices went up and food quality did not. As I said, this is also in a blue-collar town, where the majority of the folks work at the steel mills. They don't particularly want fine cuisine. Robert Irvine came in and changed the decor, which needed to be updated, and added some fancy dishes to the menu, which wouldn't appeal to the majority of customers in the area. They kept the second owner's menu, as well, which, as I said, wasn't that great. The new food was okay, but it was out of the price range for many of the people that would eat there. Now, it sits empty and unoccupied like the steel mill that shut down last year. It wasn't Kitchen Nightmares, but Restaurant Impossible. I never thought the food was bad before, it was just your average diner with average food. Certain things were better than others. Their problem was, they had a huge menu, 300 items, so a lot of stuff was frozen because it wasn't used often. The show came in, yelled at them, stripped down their menu so the food would be fresh, and totally remodeled the building. I think I went there twice afterwards. The food was a little better, but not significantly. The remodel was kinda strange. By the second time I went, the menu had doubled in size. Not as big as previously, but bigger than it should have been. They retired very shortly after that, claiming they'd lost the connection with the restaurant after the show. A little off topic, I owned and operated a moderately busy and successful dinner place in Southern California from 2006 to 2013. One afternoon I answered the phone, and it was a producer asking me if I'd be interested in being on the show. I kind of lost it for a second and then asked her what made her think I needed any help. She said they wanted to do a shoot in my city and picked me out of the phone book. Also, did I know of any places in the area who were struggling and may be interested? Weird call.